Straight talk from Israel. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
This is Josh Wander, and you have reached Israel Unplugged. This is the Israel Unplugged show, where you receive all the unadulterated facts of where we're holding in the redemptive process, focusing primarily on the ingathering of the exiles. No spin, no twist, just facts on the ground. This is a live show, so if you're listening to us from North America, you can call in and ask your questions at 301-768-4841. If you're in Eretz Israel, where you belong, then you should call 02-650-0151. Those are the numbers to call in live, and we would welcome your comments and your questions. This is, again, Josh Wander. I'm here with my co-host, Rabbi Moshe Lichtman.
Hello, hello. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us.
Today, we have a special guest. I know that I say that by every guest, but this one indeed is more special than most. He is someone that I have been privileged to have been acquainted to have prayed with for over 3 decades. He is a great Torah scholar. His name is Rabbi Nachman Kahana. He's written a number of books, including the Mei Menuchot, which is a commentary on the Talmud, on one of the commentaries on the Talmud. He's also written a 3-volume work called With All Your Might. He has also recently come out with his newest book, which is called Reflections from Yerushalayim. Rabbi Kahana is a Torah scholar, an author, a teacher, and a lecturer. He is the founder and the director of the Kohanic Center and a co-founder of the Temple Institute and of Atara Liyoshna, Ateret Kohanim. For 32 years, he was also the rabbi of the Chazon Yechezkel Synagogue in the Old City of Jerusalem, where he lives today with his wife, Fege. His weekly Parsha commentary is available. If you would like to see that, you can see it online at www.nachmankahana.com. That's NachmanKahana.com. You don't want to miss this, so please stay on, stick with us, and we will be right back with you with Rabbi Nachman Kahana. Thank you so much.
Always challenging the status quo. Hello, I'm Rod Bryant on Beyond the Matrix here at IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com. I want to encourage you to listen each week, every Wednesday at the same time, for an amazing show that will challenge you, inform you, and inspire. News, views, and wisdom for the nations here on IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com. Don't forget, Beyond the Matrix every week, Wednesday, here on IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com.
As we promised, we have a very special guest today. That is Rabbi Nachman Kahana from the Old City of Yerushalayim. We only have him for a short period of time here in the short segment. I hope you all are listening because this is a big treat for all of us. And Rav Nachman, are you online? Can you hear us?
Yeah, shalom, Yaakov Yosef. I call you Yaakov Yosef. Shalom.
I know we only have you for a short period of time, so I'll get straight to the point, and I'll let you talk. You've spoken over 30 years. I've heard many of your Divrei Torah. All are amazing. But I want to focus on one in particular. And you've spoken at length about the Shoah, about the Holocaust, and what message that has for the Jews of America today. Can you enlighten us on that topic?
Yeah, what I say about the Holocaust is not a very popular idea. But I believe it. we think the Holocaust was a gzerah, was a decree from the Shamayim to punish the Jewish people, or the Jewish people were the focus of the Second World, the Holocaust. I don't think so. I think something else. I think the decree was that children of Esav should kill the children of Esav. Germans should kill Russians, Russians should kill Austrians, they should both kill the French kill the British. And what happened over here? We were in the middle, and when you get caught in the middle, you die. There's Gemara and Bava Kama that says about the Pasuk, but if fire comes out, a person was not careful and made a fire in his property, and the fire went, and it burnt. It says, V'yatsa eish v'nachal kotzim, that it went and it burnt kotzim, it burnt weeds, and also burnt standing wheat. The Gemara says in Bava Kama, when the gzera comes out on the thorns, even the wheat gets burnt. When there's a gzera on the Rishoyim, if a tzaddik is there, he gets involved. The idea is, in very short, when Goyim kill Goyim, it's no place for a Jew to be. When you see a society, a non-Jewish society, decaying and going down, and you see that there's a potential for disaster in that society, Jews have to leave. We see it now in America, we see it now in Europe. The gates of Eretz Israel are still open. Again, who knows for how long. So we're closed for Corona, so people have to feel, what does it mean that you can't come to Eretz Israel? But they'll be open soon again. You don't take the warning now, you have only yourself to blame.
Those are very, very strong words, and I can understand why they're so unpopular, because they really get to the heart of what Jews are supposed to be doing and what they're not supposed to be doing by remaining in the exile. But for most people, that is a shocking statement, comparing the Holocaust to current day events and anti-Semitism that is going on. Do you think that can you elaborate on that at all, as far as how would you speak to an American Jew today if you had 5 minutes to speak to an American Jew and convince them that they should leave immediately because they're in the wrong place? What would you say to them?
It's a very difficult question, because the number of Jews there are, that's the number of ways you have to relate to a person. Eretz Israel is like a piece of art. Either you love the piece of art or you don't love it. And a person, if they have a feeling to Eretz Israel, they don't have a feeling, you cannot develop it. I say all the time, for example, let's say you have a huge heap of wooden, say, sawdust and metal, piece of metal. And you have to divide them. One way is you can burn the whole piece, and the wood burns, and the metal, the more valuable metal, remains. Or you can blow it away because the wood is lighter. The third way is for a magnet and take out the metal. What do you call it? I say, for example, when you're blowing it away, that's intermarriage. When you burn the wood, that's, God forbid, Jews die. But the ones that are saved are those that feel the magnet that come to Eretz Israel. To convince someone to come, I don't know how to do it, but you can get someone who's there, who has the feeling, and can speak to them. But not many people have the feeling. Eretz Israel was always an exquisite mitzvah. In the time of the Egyptians, 80% died in Egypt of the Jews. 600,000 died in the desert and wanted to come in. Time of Ezra, when he came back in time of the Second Temple, only 42,000 people came. Eretz Israel is an exquisite mitzvah that only certain people can understand it and love it. Again, let's take the Mona Lisa. Either understand it and love it, or you don't.
Rabbi, do you think there is any way that a Jew can develop a love for Eretz Yisrael if he doesn't have it naturally?
There is, right. First of all, person doesn't know if he has it, doesn't have it. Because, first of all, it's to attach themselves to a rabbi who will not talk against Aliyah. There are two issues that rabbis, I'm talking about Orthodox rabbis, don't speak about from the pulpit. One is Aliyah, and number two is ethics in business. He speaks about any of these things, people run away from the shul. Rabbis speak against Aliyah, and by even not mentioning it, it's a way of saying not to come. You have to attach yourself to people that want to come, will teach you what it means. And if you don't try, then you're going to be able to develop it. Einstein was not Einstein because he was born that way. He had to develop his brain. And Mozart was not Mozart when he was born that way. You have to develop it. So in order to understand and put an exquisite gem, you have to be a maven. You have to understand gems. You have to study it. But if you don't want to and you don't try, why should you want to come here? You're born in America. American Jews today, even Orthodox, feel they are Americans, American citizens. I never thought I was an American. In fact, I knew from a very young age that I'm coming to Eretz Yisrael, but that wasn't me and my family. But the American Jews feel they are Americans, and I think Americans and Jews last. Even the Orthodox, I'm afraid. And the rabbis help them, they encourage that feeling by just not talking about Aliyah.
We usually don't speak about current events on this show, but I want to take this opportunity because we just have a few minutes left, and I know you always have a unique perspective when it comes to current events. There was just what they call a historic peace agreement that was made with the United Arab Emirates. They believe that it's going to spread to other Arab nations in the Gulf and around this region. What are your thoughts on that? Is it a positive thing, a negative thing? What are your thoughts?
Thing like this. It's a tremendous historical change. For 1,300 years since the time of Muhammad, the Jews who lived in Muslim countries were called Jimmy. What is Jimmy? Jimmy are protected citizens, third-rate citizens of the Muslim country. They were like slaves. The taxes were always twice as much. They were forced conversion into Islam. It's called the Jimmy. All of a sudden now, but behind all these treaties with the Emirates and others is the fear of Iran. They're coming out today to be protected by the Jewish state. For 1,300 years, they would treat us in a terrible way, the Jewish people. Now they're coming to be protected, to be under our wing. That's a fact. That's what's behind all these treaties. That's fantastic. But again, they're everything. They're a danger because always life is built on a balance. How close you're supposed to be, how far you're supposed to be. It's a very big subject, but I see the hand of Hashem. Maybe another thing. Chazal say, at the end of his life, Yishmael did tshuva. The Arabs we have today in Eretz Yisrael, these are not really Arabs. These are mongrel people. They're the result of all kind of nations that passed through the Fertile Crescent. It was Greeks and Romans and who knows what. The real Arabs are the Bedouin and those in the Gulf states. And they're doing tshuva. Because Yishmael did tshuva at the end of his life. Of course, after he took Esau to be a son-in-law, that's a different story. These Arabs are doing tshuva, maybe. But again, behind it is the fear of Iran, and they want to be protected by the Israeli pilot and F-35. This is a huge, huge change in the world.
So you see this as perhaps a positive step in the redemptive process.
It's positive because Hashem is making it. Everything is positive. Just have to be able to see, be able to discern what's the positive, and you have to also again know how to inculcate the changes. There's going to a lot of money is going to come now to Eretz Yisrael. If we were rich before, and we were, we're now much more richer. It's going to come from these Gulf states, and money corrupts. Unfortunately, you have to be able to know how to deal with this money. Eretz Yisrael is going to be a very, very rich country. And what's going to be here is going to have assets, but they're part of it. But if you're not here, you're not going to get a part of it. But the deal again that wealth corrupts, and a lot of wealth corrupts absolutely.
Okay, we're
Thank
going to
you
have
so
to.
much. Thank you so much for joining with us. We appreciate you coming on, and we would love to have you on again. I know that your time is precious, and you have a chavruta to go to. Thank you again for joining us on Israel Unplugged.
The time of your listeners is also precious. We're all precious. Okay, shalom.
Thank you very much.
Shalom, shalom.
Shalom.
Shalom, everybody. Making a difference often takes just one moment and one person at a time. I am Orly Benny Davis, your show host on Israel News Talk Radios from Jerusalem with love. You'll be hearing people talking about politics, religion, social issues, and making a better tomorrow. Join me, Orly Benny Davis, for God and Country. From Jerusalem with love.
Wednesdays on Israel News Talk Radio.
Psalm 23, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Did you know this psalm and many others were composed by a Jewish shepherd and musician who later became a king? Would you like to know some of the inner meanings of psalms to help you connect with God and strengthen your soul? An exciting and easy-to-read book is now available which will help you do just that. Software for the Soul, Psalms for Everyone, available on Kindle, Audible, and Amazon.com. Software for the Soul.
Modesty at the beach? It isn't just about body image. It's about feeling good. Modest swimsuits, so we don't get burned by the sun.
So we won't get ogled by strangers.
So we'll feel free to express ourselves without the need to expose ourselves.
Let Marcy Modest help you to cover up what you want, how you want.
Made in Israel. Visit marcymodest.com. That's MARSEA modest.com.
And get a 10% discount on your first purchase.
2 new shows on Israel News Talk Radio.
The return of the Jewish people to the land of Israel was prophesied in the Bible thousands of years ago and is coming true today. Shalom. Join me, Josh Wander, on Israel Unplugged. Listen in as we delve into the spiritual and physical aspects of the Jewish return to Zion. We'll discuss the biblically mandated, historic, and of course practical understandings of this incredible transition from exile to redemption. That's Israel Unplugged, every Monday on IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com.
How did a nice Jewish girl from Delaware end up living in Israel? Shalom, I'm Natalie Sapinski. Join me on my show, Returning Home. Meet different people who have moved to Israel. Hear their personal stories, their highs, their lows, and everything in between. Each week, we talk to experts on immigration and the process of moving to Israel. Listen to Returning Home every Thursday, only on Israel News Talk Radio.
Okay, we're back at Israel Unplugged. This is Rabbi Moshe Lichtman, your co-host, and we just had a tremendous, beautiful, very inspirational interview with Rabbi Nachman Kahana, who I didn't have time to mention before, but I had the merit, the privilege of learning from him some 35 years ago when I first came to Israel for my first year. He taught us Chumash, he taught us the Torah, and we had a class with him once a week, or maybe twice a week, and it was in the book of Leviticus, in Vayikra, which is all about the sacrifices, and it was unbelievable because he happens to be a Kohen, right? He's of the priestly caste of the Jewish people. He's a Kohen, as his last name indicates, Kahana. And he really brought the book of Leviticus alive, because to him it was like actual halacha l'maisa, meaning practical issues. The temple is going to be rebuilt very soon, and we have to know how to offer sacrifices. And it was a very big privilege, as I said, to learn with him. And he's a very prolific author, and we had a very big privilege of hearing from him. I wanted to maybe discuss a few of the issues that he brought up. So he had a very unique and novel take on the Holocaust. He said that he believes that the Holocaust was really not about the Jews. It was about the nations fighting against the nations. God had decreed that there should be a war between nations, and the Jews were simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. That is very interesting. I usually take it from a different perspective. I usually say that, well, first of all, we have to understand that there is no way, and it's very dangerous to give reasons for such a colossal event in Jewish history and history at all, and such a tragic event where so many Jews, people always say the 6 million, but I understand that the number is actually closer to 7 million, and I think we should start saying 7 million, not 6 million, but that's a different issue. So many of our nation were killed. It's a very dangerous thing to start giving reasons for it. In fact, I was once a scholar in residence in a shul somewhere in the diaspora. I won't say where. And I mentioned something about the book that I translated, which we actually touched on a little bit last week. We'll do it a different week. We'll get into it more in detail, by someone who was living through the Holocaust, eventually died, was killed, but he wrote a book exactly about this issue, giving what he felt was the reason why the Holocaust was happening. It was a wake-up call. It was to tell the Jewish people, stop getting so comfortable in the exile. It's time to come back home. It's time to come back to Eretz Yisrael. God wanted to initiate the redemption, but there was no one to do it. There was no one who was willing to go along with it. So God had to persecute the Jewish people in order to get them to start moving and to start going out of Israel. So I mentioned that in this community that I was a scholar in residence, and I got a very, very harsh reaction. Who are you to give reasons? And the problem is, I am nobody. I would never give a reason, but I was quoting somebody who is entitled to an opinion for two very important reasons. Rav Shlomo Tachtal, who wrote that book, Ema Banim Smecha, he, number one, was an amazing Torah scholar. He knew the entire Torah backwards and forwards. 15 times in the book, which he wrote while he was running from the Nazis, he wrote, I can't quote the exact source now because I'm writing without books. And then he went on to quote almost the exact source. That means he knew it all at the tip of his tongue. So number one, he was a gadol Israel. He was a great Torah leader and therefore is entitled to an opinion. And second of all, he was living through it and therefore he could give an opinion. Just like on the other side, the Satmar Rebbe, who was vehemently anti-Zionist, and he came to the conclusion that the Holocaust was a result of Zionism. He's also entitled to his opinion because he was living through it, and he also was a great Torah scholar. So anyway, that is my take. I believe more like what Rav Tachtal writes in Ema Banim Smecha, and there are many sources to back it up, that the Holocaust was God's way of awakening us to the redemption, to start the redemption, because we were in a slumber. We were in a 2,000-year slumber of exile, and the time had come to wake up, and we weren't waking up. Like, what happens if you're trying to wake up your child to go to minyan in the morning, and he's not getting up to go to pray in the morning, right? He's not getting up, so sometimes you have to shake him a little bit. You have to pour some water on him in order to wake him up. Sometimes you need a little bit harsher ways of waking somebody up, and that's what the Holocaust was. And to deny the connection between the Holocaust and the establishment of the State of Israel, I think, is to deny reality, because it's literally a blink of the eye, historically speaking, the amount of time between the end of the Holocaust and the establishment of the State of Israel. It was less than 3 years. Historically speaking, that's nothing. How could it be that immediately after the Holocaust was over, and very clearly as a result of the Holocaust, the nations of the world felt guilty, and they felt that they had to, give us something for all the suffering we went through, and they allowed us to come back and establish our own state in our ancient homeland. To say that that's just all coincidence and is not God's plan, part of God's plan, I think is denying reality and denying facts. And I very strongly believe that is what the Holocaust was about. And by the way, I think another thing that has to be addressed is that it doesn't mean that that's the only way it had to happen. If we would have hearkened to the call of God to come back to the land of Israel prior to the Holocaust, there were great rabbis and, yes, even secular Jews who were calling for a return to the land of Israel, a rebuilding of the state that we lost 1,800 years prior to that. If we would have listened to that call, then, you know what? We would not have had to have gone through a Holocaust, because we would have woken up on our own. And I think that brings us back to today's day and age, where we are unfortunately doing very similar things. God sends us messages, and he tries in a nice way to give us a message, and when we don't listen, eventually he has to put on the pressure. He has to wake us up in a harsher way, as I said before. And therefore we have to take the lessons and take the messages that God gives us and sends us at the beginning, when they just start. And in that way we will avoid the potential tragedies that could come to the Jewish people. God is redeeming the Jewish people. He wants us to be redeemed. And he also wants us all to be redeemed. All the Jewish people need to come back to the land of Israel and to be redeemed. So if we're not listening to him when he's trying to tell us in a nice way, so he has to get us to go in some other way. And that, in my belief, is what the Holocaust was about. And I hope that's not what's going to happen in America. I hope that Jews are going to get the message when it's not so harsh, when things are not so bad, when it's still possible to get out and to come back to our homeland. See, before the Holocaust, there was no homeland. I mean, the land was there, but we weren't in control of it, so it was actually really difficult. But now, all a Jew in America has to do is buy a ticket. And in fact, you don't even have to buy a ticket, because if you make Aliyah, the state of Israel pays for that ticket and brings you for free. So that's really all the Jews have to do. Let's hope that the Jews, get the message before it's too late. Josh, you have any comments?
I appreciate what you said, and I definitely am not arguing with you or of course Rav Teichtal or any of the Satmar Rebbe, but I appreciate very much what Rav Nachman said, because in a way, it answers a question that many people have, and the question that was pointed towards you. Who are you to give these kind of answers? How do you know what God had in mind? And the way Rav Nachman is explaining it is totally different, because he's not saying, there's the age-old question, why do bad things happen to good people, and how could it be that so many righteous people were killed during the Holocaust? And the way that Rav Nachman is explaining it is really, it had nothing to do with them. They could have been the most righteous people in the world. They were just in the wrong place at the wrong time. So I think that's a unique way of looking at it, and it explains a lot. It's a way of explaining how such terrible things can happen to such great people.
100%. And as the saying goes in the Talmud, Elu ve'elu divrei Elohim chayim, both this and that are the words of the living God, meaning all of these are legitimate Torah approaches to the issue, and I think we should probably take a combination of them all. There might be a little bit of truth to each one of them, and each one of them, as long as it was said by a great Torah scholar and somebody who knows the big picture, I think we should accept all the different ideas on this topic.
The other thing he discussed was the fact that American Jews, if you're not born with the desire to come to Israel, it's not going to magically come to you. So you either got it or you don't. And that's something that if you'd like to discuss it, we can continue into the next segment. But it's a fascinating approach towards Jewry in America. Of course, he feels that unlike the famous Medrash that and the famous song by Mordechai Ben David, or is it Ever Free, that no Jew will be left behind, he believes that many will, just like they were in Egypt. Many Jews will be left behind. And maybe we should continue this in the next segment. If everybody wants to hold on, we'll be right back. Thank you for joining us on Israel Unplugged.
You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
This is Shai Ben-Tekoa, and each week I'll be webcasting to you from Judea, origin of the word Jew, a people besieged and beleaguered in every generation. Nazi Germany's but a memory, but in its place the world invented the phantom Palestinians as this generation's internationally authorized Jew killers. Tune in for a different slant on life in Israel, Phantom Nation, every Monday.
Hi, I'm Rabbi David Aaron. The soul basics are the most profound, the most essential, and yet often the most neglected in our education. Join me for Soul Talk on Israel's News Talk Radio and discover the secrets to love, spiritual growth, and personal power.
How did a nice Jewish girl from Delaware end up living in Israel? Shalom, I'm Natalie Sapinski. Join me on my show, Returning Home. Meet different people who have moved to Israel. Hear their personal stories, their highs, their lows, and everything in between. Each week, we talk to experts on immigration and the process of moving to Israel. Listen to Returning Home every Thursday, only on Israel News Talk Radio.
So another great thing that Rabbi Nachman Kahana in the first segment, if you missed that, then you want to go back after this is on recorded and listen to that. The other great thing that he said, insight, was that someone who is a Jew that doesn't have the love burning in him for Eretz Israel, for the land of Israel, is a lost cause, basically, because it's not going to just magically come to them. You either got it or you don't. And this brings us to an interesting conversation which we were having offline, and this is related to my daily podcast that I have called Bring Them Home. And we interviewed this past week, or it was last week, Rabbi Danny Myers from Beit Shemesh, and we were discussing how we're fortunate enough in non-corona times to have hundreds of seminary girls come to our house for Shabbos. And often we have a discussion about the centrality of Eretz Israel, and we speak about how it's important, not only important, but possibly obligatory to live in Eretz Israel today. And then they reply and say, but our rabbis tell us that we don't have to. And then I am in a very, very difficult position, because on one hand, I don't want to tell them that they don't have to listen to their rabbis. On the other hand, their rabbis perhaps are missing the boat. So Rabbi Lichtman, what would you have to say to that?
Right. So I was explaining that I think it really depends how the rabbi says it. If it's exactly the way you just said, that you don't have to, so, that rabbi definitely has upon whom to rely to say that a Jew does not have to. It's not obligatory in our day and age to live in Israel. There's the famous responsa, the tshuva of Rav Moshe Feinstein, where he said that it's definitely a mitzvah from the Torah to live in the land of Israel. However, he claims it is not an obligatory mitzvah, but it is a voluntary mitzvah. It's a mitzvah that if you do, you get the mitzvah, but you don't have to do it. So again, we could discuss that tshuva a different time, and I have a lot to say on it. But it would be very difficult.
But what I always point out in that tshuva, sorry to interrupt, is that it was written in 1952, a couple years after the creation of the state, and we're living in a completely different reality than what was happening in 1952 when he wrote that responsa.
Right. Again, that is part of what I have to say on it, but I don't think we have enough time to go into it, and I think we'd have to really read it together and actually learn it, and we'd need a lot more time for that. So let's leave that aside right now. But I agree with you 100%. So if a rabbi would say, you don't have to live in Israel, I would have a hard time saying to the seminary girl, don't listen to your rabbi, because, I personally disagree with Rav Moshe Feinstein, and I know there's a lot of rabbis who do, but you can't just dismiss Rav Moshe Feinstein. And therefore, that's one type of answer. But if the rabbi is belittling it and is saying, there's nothing special, blah, blah, etc., that's already a different story. That's already a rabbi who is denying, very, very simple statements of the rabbis throughout the Talmud, and verses throughout Tanakh, the Torah, Nevi'im, and Ketuvim, the Jewish Bible. I mean, it's everywhere that how special living in Eretz Yisrael is. You want to tell your students, you know what? I wish you should all have a dream to one day come to Israel. That would be the most amazing thing. But right now, don't let it, don't change plans. Don't not go out with guys who don't want to live in Israel. Don't do those kind of things. But, still have that dream. Then I could hear that. Again, I take a different approach. I say, push it all the time. Say how important it is to live in Israel and you should all come. But I could understand that. But if you have a rabbi who belittles it, there's actually a very famous rabbi who someone showed me once something that he wrote, and I was so shocked by it, and I lost all respect for this rabbi, literally, because he didn't just say, it's not so important. He said, don't come to Israel. He was talking about, young marrieds, who want to sometimes go to Israel for a year and sometimes they end up staying. And he says, don't do it. Stay in Brooklyn. He literally said that. Stay in Brooklyn. Stay in America. Give your parents and your grandparents nachas, enjoyment from your children, etc. No, that's not the Torah approach to living in Israel. The Torah approach to living in Israel is you're allowed to disobey your parents if your parents tell you not to live in Israel. That's one of the things.
You're allowed to divorce your spouse.
Exactly. It's one of the things you don't have to listen to your parents about because it's going against the Torah. So how this rabbi said this, I don't understand. And again, he's a very well-known and very famous. He's not alive anymore, but he was a very influential rabbi, and I don't understand it. I cannot accept that. But I can accept the rabbi saying, not putting so much emphasis on it. I think he's mistaken, especially in our day and age, to not put an emphasis. Our shared, Rabbi, Rav Hershel Schachter, writes in his article about the mitzvah of living in Israel. He writes that, every generation has a special mitzvah that even if it's not necessarily important of itself, but in that particular generation, it takes on special importance. He says the mitzvah of our day is living in Israel. He's not saying it's not an important mitzvah otherwise, but he's saying the mitzvah of living in the land of Israel is the mitzvah of the hour. I think it's a tremendous mistake not to emphasize it in our day and age, because since everything that's been going on in the last 100 years, to just ignore it all and just go on with life as if nothing has happened, nothing has changed in the Jewish world, is I think a very big mistake. And then that's the way I would discuss. That's what I would say to
Rabbi Myers had a very interesting perspective. He basically said that Eretz Yisrael, you definitely have to listen to your rabbis, and when they tell you about the laws of Shabbos and the laws of Kashrus, and of course, whenever it comes to any Hashkafa questions, you have to listen. But you have to also keep in mind the perspective of the Gedolim, the great Torah leaders, and their history that they have had throughout Jewish history, meaning that there is a concept in Jewish law of negias, that if you have a connection to something, a Torah dispute, for example, or a testimony, you're not allowed to be involved in that. You have to take yourself away from that because you know that if somebody gives you a present, then that is considered to be a bribe, and it's going to affect your judgment. So we can look historically and see whether it be from in Mitzrayim, when 80% of the Jews didn't make it out, including many of the great people in the Dor Midbar, the Nesiim that were the Meraglim. The mistake that they made in Bavel, when the Gedolim stayed in Bavel and they didn't heed the call of Ezra to come back. We see over and over again in history where the Gedolim had a certain attachment to the exile, and therefore they may, in that particular aspect of Torah, may have had a negias. They may have skewed their judgment.
Wow, he's 100% correct. I mean, we see that throughout. In fact, one of the books that I translated, maybe we'll discuss it in a different episode, Rise from the Dust by Tzvi Galat. Again, we won't go through what the book is all about. It's actually a very interesting story behind it. But anyway, the first half of the book is all about that. It's all about, from a hashkafic perspective, how the Jewish people have repeated the same mistake over and over again throughout history. And sometimes the greatest rabbis have been the ones to make the mistake about the importance of living in the land of Israel. It's what God wants. It's clearly what God wants. And yeah, I agree with Rabbi Myers that we have to sometimes say to our rabbis, that's great. I appreciate your opinion, but I'm going to go with what I think is what the Torah really wants. And by the way, I don't think there would ever be a rabbi, except for maybe if you're a Satmar Chassid. I don't think there'd ever be a rabbi who would say that it's usher for you to come to Israel. They might not encourage it. They might say, there's more important things to.
You haven't visited Lakewood lately. Do you only have a few minutes left? Did you have a Dvar Torah? You don't have enough time for that.
I don't think we have enough time for it. I don't think so. We could we'll end with this. So what are you saying?
I can tell you that I once had the privilege of taking a very, very old, it was many years ago, and he was in his 90s at the time, an old Satmar Chassid on a tour here on Har Zaysim here in Yerushalayim. And he told me we started discussing the Satmar Rebbe's positions on Medinat Yisrael, on the state of Israel, and he said, "Listen to me carefully." He says that I knew the Satmar Rebbe as a confidant of the Rebbe of Yoel Teitelbaum, which, by the way, his Yortzei was just a couple of days ago. I was very close with him. I know him better than any Satmar Chassid that's alive today. And he said to me straight to the point. He said, "I want to tell you that if he was living today, there is no way that he would have had as much animosity towards the state as he did back then. It's clear to him that he would have seen that back when he was vehemently against the state, it was because he understood that the state was moving in an anti-Torah way. And by the way, a similar thing is said by Meshi Zahav, by the head of Zaka. He wrote an open letter to his great uncle, to Amram Blau, who started the Neturei Karta, and he said, I understand, uncle, that you had concerns that the state was leading everybody to be secular and it was taking people away from the Torah, but you should be relaxed. You should understand that the reality was very different than what you imagined, and that actually it is completely going in the right direction. It's becoming more Torah and more godly than ever before."
Wow. But of course, if you tell that to a Satmar Chassid, they'll tell you that, you can't prove that, and that's true. It's always dangerous to say, somebody came up and said the Satmar Rebbe, said something at the end of his days, or, because you could say that about Rav Kook also. Someone will say, Rav Kook really, at the end of his days, he said that it wasn't true and all that. So it's a little dangerous. You have to go on what they wrote during their lifetimes. Okay, so it was a great show. I hope you all enjoyed, and please share this with everyone else, and we'll see you next week, Monday, 4 o'clock.
Israel News Talk Radio's chat room. Just click the orange button at the top of the IsraelNewsTalkRadio.home page, log in as yourself or an anonymous guest, and join in on the fun. You'll meet other listeners from all over the world who listen to Israel News Talk Radio, and you can make new friends. Israel News Talk Radio's chat room. It's the closest you can get to being in the studio with us.
We love listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
Where can you get the inside news on Israel? At Israel News Talk Radio, we're dedicated to sharing Israel's inside story with the world by providing our listeners with news on Israeli politics, current affairs, and Israeli Jewish culture. The Israel News Talk Radio homepage also provides you, the listener, with useful information at your fingertips, with scrolling news headlines, weather, currency exchange, Shabbat candlelighting times, and so much more. Our radio programming is always accessible and on demand. We operate absolutely free of charge for everyone, everywhere. If you love what we do, partner with us now by becoming an Israel News Talk Radio supporter. With your support, you'll be inscribed on our Israel News Talk Radio Wall of Fame. There's nothing like us in the world. Be part of something great. Israel News Talk Radio. Straight talk from Israel.
If you love Israel News Talk Radio Then you'll love our Facebook page. We keep you up to date on what's happening in Israel, plus little surprise treasures that we don't share on the radio. Go now to follow us on Facebook. Just look for the Israel News Talk Radio Facebook page, and don't forget to subscribe and follow us by clicking on the like button. We post great stuff there that you'll want to share. Israel News Talk Radio on Facebook and Israel News Radio on Twitter.
News, opinion, and more. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.